Let's Get To presents Go Go Astros, a focus on H-Town hardball.
And we're back here, guys, on Go Astros. It is our playoff preview. We're going to be focused mostly on the ALDS, and you'll notice that I have all four gentlemen with me for the first time. First of all, whichever one of you goes, how many times have the Astros made the playoffs in their history? Does anybody have the number off the top of their head?
10 division titles and 2 wild cards.
Plus that thing in 81 that they didn't really win the division. So
and last year.
And last year was
14. Yeah.
So we should be, I think, enjoying the fact that we get baseball for at least 3 more games, right?
Absolutely.
So we're diving in. We've got Astros, White Sox. First of all, I'm going to be really tired of the factoid that will be repeated ad nauseum of the first time World Series rematch has happened, but not in the World Series because of the Astros being having a gun put to their head and moved to the AL. But let's start
with Bud.
What's that?
Thanks, Bud Selig.
Yeah, Bud Selig. The only guy worse than Manfred. But let's talk.
This is the Bud Selig matchup. He wanted to get away from the White Sox and screw Houston over, and he managed to do both.
Yeah, he really did. Is he still with us on this earthly plane?
Yeah. So I believe he is a professor at the University of Wisconsin. So my condolences to my colleagues over there.
And he's on some committee with the Baseball Hall of Fame too, which just grosses me out.
Oh, that's awesome. I think let's start with some of the different matches the Astros have going against this the White Sox team, and I want to start with probably the biggest problem area. Andy, what do you see as the biggest problem area from your view with when you break down all the matchups between the Astros and the White Sox?
I really think it's which part of our pitching staff is going to show up and perform, and especially when you get into the bullpen. I think our starters are going to be fine, but the White Sox probably for the first time this season are 95% healthy with their lineup, and they are a team that can get really hot really quick and just tear the cover off the ball. And it's kind of it reminds me a lot of the Astros lineup in 17, and really even this year. I don't want to discount the Astros, but where there's not an easy out, maybe until you get to the 9th hitter, but everybody is a qualified major league hitter and pretty much above average throughout their lineup. And they've got just dangerous guys like Tim Anderson and somehow Jose Abreu, who has been linked to the Astros for a number of years prior to us acquiring Gurriel, who just seems to destroy us every time we see him. So that's my big worry, is containing their offense, especially in the late innings.
Brian, how do you see the bullpen in particular, but pitching versus that lineup shaken out?
So the Astros have a above average. Well, they're a top 10 run prevention team. They have an average pitching staff. They get bonus from having an excellent defense. And so they don't have a dominant pitcher that's going to go at it. They don't have an ace level pitcher. We've all talked about Lance McCullers ace-ish. And he'll be, we presume, the game 1 and game 5 starter. So that's a big sort of concern. And we don't have Graveman and Stanek have been very good, but aren't sort of names you have deep trust in. And that particularly contrasts to a White Sox bullpen, which is, their closer's Liam Hendriks, who is probably the best reliever in the American League. And they acquired Craig Kimbrell to be a setup man. And that's, getting runs against those guys in the late innings is going to be a issue, and a bigger issue for the Astros offense against the White Sox than the other way around.
Although we do seem to hit Hendriks pretty well as a team.
Yes.
Because he usually mouths off first, and it's like karma comes and bites him, and then it's all over but the crying.
We know for certain that Liam Hendriks has a potty mouth, so if he's washing his mouth out with soap, that may harm his performance on the mound.
And it does take a while to wash off the Oakland stink off your body. So, Hendriks may have that out of his system, but who knows?
I guess the sad part of it all is there's not a lot of trust in the bullpen. And the big thing that we've been talking about, not just us, but Astros fans, is how do we get it to Presley? I think we all, for the most part, think Presley's is a dominant reliever. He might not be Hendriks, but he's dominant. But has the Graveman trade not been as good as advertised, Brian?
I mean, so I looked at his numbers in September. His his ERA was really low, but his walk rate was, I think he walked 6 batters per 9 innings. And so I looked at that ERA and went like, that doesn't feel right. And then I looked at the walk rate and says, yes, that feels like what I've been seeing. And so, that's sort of a concern about Graveman, is that he hasn't pitched quite as well, particularly when it comes to walks, since he's gotten to Houston as he did before the trade. But the overall performance is good. And, there's good reason to trust him in the late innings. But he's not a dominant reliever like Hendricks or Kimbrel. So again, advantage in the late innings is to the White Sox.
Andy, do you have anything else on the Graveman trade?
I think from the Astros Twitter perspective, the issue with the Graveman trade is that Abraham Toro got a place to play every day and started producing. And some pretty dramatic hit. I mean, but that's how we like to evaluate trades, right? It's not just we got Graveman, who I think is a plus addition compared to what we have. He's a better 8th inning guy than Stanek is an 8th inning guy. So we improved from that perspective. But Toro has had a very good half season with Seattle, and people see that and, well, why isn't he hitting in our lineup? Well, where is he going to play? I mean, he's not going to play over Bregman. He's not going to play over Correa. He's not going to play over Altuve. So it was a trade that I think worked out well for both teams. And I think Graveman's got a lot of upside. I think that, his control from a career perspective has been spotty. Prior
He fits right in then, doesn't he?
But I mean, prior to coming to the Astros, this was kind of his career year. And I think this is his first taste of the playoffs, if I recall correctly.
Yes.
So we're going to see how he handles pressure. I have high hopes for him. I hope it does well, because what's the alternative?
Golf sooner than planned before.
I mean, I do have my Hawaiian shirt on today, so I am ready for vacation.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about starting rotations then. The White Sox seem to come in with a higher sort of regarded starting rotation. I'm not sure I buy it. I'm not sure. I don't know if I'm blinded by going 5-2 against them as a team, but where does the starting rotation matchups go for you? Andy, we'll start with you. Our guys, who I think we all agree is really a group of number 2s or number 3s, right? They're not bad. They're just not
right.
They're not a guy that's going to wag his dick out there and say, we're going to, thank God. But
no, I mean, there's no Verlander on this staff. There's no Garrett Cole on this staff. We've got maybe some less subprime year or less prime year Dallas Keuchels on the staff. And I think you're right. We have 2s and 3s. LMJ, McCullers Jr. is our, lack of a better term, ace. He's our number 1 guy. He's going to get the Thursday start. He has the ability to be really dominant and then have the 1 inning where everything just implodes on him. And that seems to be his history. Now, where I think he's gotten better this year is when the inevitable error behind him happens or in the inevitable walk happens, he doesn't crater as badly as he has in years past. So I think there's maturity happening there. I think Fromber's very solid to very good. I think Fromber, prior to certain adjustments being made by the league front office, wink, wink, was on his way to being, probably the ace of the staff, but just from a stuff standpoint and having a real command. I think he's less than, but he's gotten better over the last month or so with his starts. And I think he's a good matchup. And Urquidy is a guy, he's just going to throw strikes. And what I like about Urquidy, he's not going to dazzle you. He doesn't throw all that hard, but he doesn't walk a lot of guys. And so when he does give up the home runs that he gives up, it's usually not huge damage around them. It's a 1-run homer versus a 3-run homer. The matchup with the White Sox is interesting because you're right, from a how it's regarded standpoint. If I tell you Lynn, Giolito, and Rodon at the beginning of the season was the rotation we're facing, that's a tough ask. But Lynn struggles against the Astros historically, and it's been going on for a few years. It's not just a single game occurrence. Giolito, I think, is probably going to be our toughest matchup because he's been good for us and he's good on the road. He's good at home. It doesn't really faze him. See how he does in playoff pressure. And then I think they're throwing Dylan Cease,
yes,
given his name, third. So for the Sunday game, he's not been great. And the issue that the White Sox have is that Rodon is not right. I don't know what better term for it, but he's not the pitcher he was in the first half. He's not even the pitcher that he really was in August. And you can tell that by the fact that he's not going to make an appearance in the series until maybe game 4, where, on paper, if you look at his numbers, he should be a guy that's maybe your 1 or 2 starter. So I think if you're comparing rotations, I like the Astros situation better against the White Sox than I like the White Sox against the Astros hitters.
Brian, I want you to break that down as well, but let's start from the back end with Rodon. How big, or the back end of where Andy left off, how big of a loss is that for the White Sox? I just remember the one game he pitched against us, or did he pitch twice?
No, the one game he had 7 innings, I believe, shutout innings against us in Chicago coming out of the All-Star break. That is his last quality start of the season. Oh. So you're both right. Jim, that, this is, he's pitched really well when he's been able to pitch, but as Andy notes, he has been not 100%. He's been on the injured list some, and even when he's been there, been in the rotation, it's been 5 innings at most, I think, in pretty much all his starts since that start against the Astros. Now, some of that could be strategic. They are in a god-awful division where no other team finished above 500, so they have known since, June 1st that they could prep for the playoffs. So that's undoubtedly affected their thinking. But, I think you might want to ramp them up a little bit the closer you get to September, the closer you get to the playoffs, and we haven't seen that. In fact, he was on the injured list for much of September. So Rodon had an excellent season. When he was on the hill. So that's a big issue for the White Sox. The White Sox are had the top ERA in the American League. And the reason they do is predominantly because they have good, high quality starting pitching. That contrasts to the Astros, who scored the most runs of any team in the American League. And, they won it by, I think, 6 over the Rays. Thankfully, the Rays didn't score any on Sunday, and the Astros scored 7. So that's the real, to me, key matchup of this series. That's the strength against strength matchup. Can the Astros hitters? I think the White Sox are tops in the American League in strikeouts, or one of the top rates. The Astros, of course, as we know, the team that strikes out the least. So again, it's a strength against strength matchup. It's the part that most sort of would excite me as a neutral fan about this series. And, it is something where I expect that, the Astros' ability to take long at-bats, to foul off lots of pitches, to avoid strikeouts, I think will be an asset for them in getting some damage, or at least getting pitch counts up of White Sox pitchers.
Well, let's talk about our lineup then. And Brian, we'll start with you. So as Andy pointed out, in 2017, 1 through 8 was a gauntlet, and then you get to 9. But I would argue that 1 through 7 now is a gauntlet, 8 is a question mark, and 9 is, of course, machete. But maybe he should learn to bunt. I'm telling you. I know. But
I think he can bunt. I just don't think he can run. Yeah. So you have to have both for that to work.
He's got to bunt really, really well.
But he comes up with Chazzy Fizz on second and nobody out. I want him bunting 100% of the time. I'm sorry, I do. But talk about the lineup. Talk about that center field position. Jose Siri, I can't believe that there were people who wanted him starting in center field over both McCormick and Myers, considering they were so blown away about his triple, ignoring that his triple was him running through a stop sign and had a decent major league outfielder thrown into a decent major league infielder. He would have been out and it wouldn't have been close. Talk a little bit about that, Brian, start with our center field position and just our lineup in general.
Sure. I believe now that he's advanced to the majors that Siri has also graduated to be an instructor at the Jose Altuve School of Base Running, which we've seen several times.
Yeah.
But regardless of that, okay, both Jake Myers and Chas McCormick were above average major league hitters and are excellent defensive outfielders. And the numbers show that in both cases. Both of them had OPS pluses above 100. And by the way, both of them are better at that than Miles Straw. We've upgraded at center field.
Yeah, that's the funny part of all of it, right, Andy? Like all of the people that are mad that we don't have Straw anymore. And I'm like, y'all were so mad that
that anger lasted for maybe a series, maybe two.
Every time
And then-
Maton gives up a run, we gave up Straw for this, and I'm like,
and then Myers hits it, and then Myers hit a home run, and then I guess he's better then, because we're stupid fans. This is a fan base, we're just not bright, especially if you're measuring our intelligence by Twitter, because we're just, oh my God, the sleeve, what's happening with the sleeve? All my emotions live there, and it's just asinine. Anybody who is pining over Miles Straw can go to Cleveland. Flights are not that expensive. And he's got a lot of free time right now.
Sorry to interrupt, Brian. Continue, please.
I've been to Cleveland. It's a fine city. I recommend a vacation there. The Astros have a long and deep lineup. A big key to this season has been Yuli Gurriel bouncing back from having it's also Jose Altuve had a particularly poor season in 2020. Both of them have bounced back. We expected Altuve to bounce back. That's not a surprise. Gurriel, I think we were worried about, and Gurriel is the American League batting champion and one of the top 10 guys in on base percentage in the American League. So it is a deep lineup that goes it's particularly deep 1 to 7, and then we've upgraded the 8th position by having either McCormick or Myers. They will probably, I think, still trade off in center field during this series as the center fielder. It is a lineup that doesn't have huge power. They're not a huge home run team, but they are a high batting average, low strikeout team, and they put tons of balls in play, put pressure on the defense. The White Sox have a very poor defense. They are rated very low in almost every defensive metric. So not striking out, getting the ball into play is a big advantage if the Astros can do that. But again, as I noted before, the White Sox pitching are very good at avoiding putting balls in play, which is another fancy way of saying they strike a lot of batters out. If the Astro batters can avoid that, that's advantage to the Astros on offense.
Andy, how are you feeling about the offense? Because, you and I message nonstop through games, and sometimes it's not great. Talk about our emotions are on our sleeves. Did you see enough of them? Did you see enough of the offense in those last 6 games where they did hit the ball well? They clawed back to feel like maybe the switch was turned on. And I hate that phrase in baseball more than any other sport, because contrary to what the Astros did last year, I just don't buy that you can do that in baseball. But do you feel like that's what's happened?
I think baseball more, and certainly sports in general, but baseball probably more than the other professional sports, the intensity that a player brings to the game matters a lot. And when you're in a playoff situation, a heightened situation, I don't know that it's as simple as turning on the switch as much as it is understanding that literally every at bat counts now, versus, do I really care if I get this hit against the Royals? We proved that we didn't this year, by the way, because I know I'm going to, have 62 more at bats this week. It doesn't, that mentality is different in the playoffs. One of the things I think the Astros have a huge advantage with from a lineup perspective is that we have an overwhelming amount of playoff experience on our roster. We've been top to bottom, with the exception of Jake Myers, in position to face batters in playoff position, in elimination games, and understand the ramifications of doing big things and small things offensively. And I think as a team, they communicate well. I think they study pitchers better than most teams do, and going into the trash can range. But literally, if you have a tell, they're going to pick it up and they're going to share it amongst themselves, and they're going to be on you really quickly. They're not going to sit around waiting for the, let's see if Jordan figures out what I saw. That's not how they operate. And I think that they are going to be able to put together a very solid game plan against pitchers, to which they're fairly familiar with, in Cease and in Lynn. I think they faced Giolito less, certainly, than anybody else in the rotation. And Rodon, again, we've talked about, he might be a 5-inning guy at this point. I think the biggest tell on Rodon, not to really go back to that, is that he is the 4th starter. So it's not just a matter of, hiding him, or I guess it is a matter of trying to hide him and limit the damage, because there's no way we're going to face him twice. So he's not going to tax the bullpen because he can only go 4 or 5 innings. But no, the approach, back to your original question, I like a lineup that has Altuve hitting. I like a lineup that has Brantley in number 2 and Bregman behind him with Alvarez in cleanup. I think our 5, 6, 7 hitters are better than any other 5, 6, 7 hitters in baseball, because you're talking about Gurriel, Correa, and Tucker, who is coming to his own and probably should be our team MVP, if such an award is actually given out by anybody but Brian McTaggart. I don't know who gives that out.
No, I do think they do that, but I love.
Yeah, but it's the baseball writers. But who? I mean, is it
the Houston chapter of the baseball writers or McTaggart?
So Brian McTaggart. Back to my
Brian,
point.
we want unless
maybe Kaplan has a vote too.
I'll ask him after the segment. So
yeah, so I feel really good from an offensive standpoint. To Brian's point, especially, we aren't a team that strikes out more, which taxes starting pitchers because they have to throw more pitches. I know we get in little streaks and we, gripe about it online where we take no pitches and, we give pitchers 3-pitch innings. Sometimes it feels like.
Yeah.
Biggest issue I have offensively, which has been an issue offensively since I've watched the Astros, and it may just honestly be my own personal issue, is the lack of situational hitting that this team seems to be capable of at times. And I understand this is a team that scored more runs than any team in the American League. So they certainly are getting people across the plate. But it always feels like if we get a runner in scoring position with less than 2 outs, it's just a struggle sometimes to get that runner over or get him home, just hitting pop flies to the outfield to sacrifice. And I'd like to see a better approach with that, but I don't know that you change a whole lot for the playoffs after 162 game series. And for some of these guys, 5, 6, 10-year careers.
Brian, did you see enough of the offense out of the last 6 games to feel better about things?
Yeah, I actually, for a blog post I wrote last night, looked up how the Astros had done in the last 27 games. So divide up the season into 27 games, or as one of my commenters said, 6 Altuves. And so in the last, since September 6th, the Astros collectively had a batting average of 271. That's 5th in the league. An on-base percentage of 345. That's 4th. A slugging percentage of 483. That's 3rd in the league. That didn't feel right to me. And I think the premise of your question and what Andy's saying right there sort of goes with that, right? That didn't feel right in part because they had that really horrific slump once they got the magic number down to 2 or 3 and lost those 4 straight games in Los Angeles and then in Oakland, where they didn't score any runs at all and then barely scored any runs to squeak by the Rays to get the win in the first game of that series. So our sort of emotional intensity, we're paying particular attention to, hey, just get this over with. Why aren't you getting this over with? Why aren't you? I think that overly colored our perception of how the offense has been playing. That is the exception recently. Scoring runs, they've averaged like 4.8 runs per game during that period of time has been the rule. That being said, how you play going into the postseason is not really well correlated with how you play in the postseason.
Right. It does feel like baseball is the least momentum carrying over sport, particularly where we're gonna go 4 days. So who knows what team is showing up Thursday morning, right?
We had a great example of it last year. The Astros stunk on ice the last week of the season, and could not beat the Rangers, who were
still won the silver boot though, baby.
They did, thank God.
The what?
The silver boot. I care, Brian.
The what?
The silver boot, and I care about it. Me and Archbishop Deshays are the only ones who care.
But they walked into Minnesota last year like they had been a team that had been hitting all season. So, I mean, it's what is both maddening and fascinating about baseball playoffs is that you have all this data that means absolutely nothing once you get into the playoffs.
It's a very different sport in the playoffs because you're going to get the starting pitchers will go not as long. The relief pitchers will go longer than they usually go. You try to maximize your best pitchers. And how many innings they pitch. And so, it'll be interesting to see how Dusty manages the bullpen. There are 3 guys we trust, and I'm not sure I trust anybody else fully in that bullpen. So one alternative may be to try to stretch out the 3 guys we mentioned before. The other alternative might be, if Odorizzi and, Javier can be sort of long men and they can go the 3rd time through the order. Possibly Greinke. We'll see how that goes. He's had 1 relief appearance in the last 14 years. So, we'll see how that carries over on Sunday. And so, it's a different, part of the reason for this is it's a different sport in many ways because, and of course, there are 2 off days in the 5-game series. So you have very little concern about using guys on multiple days. You can use Presley for 4 outs on both Thursday and Friday, I think, without a problem or out of concern. Or if you're in a big jam in, 1 out in the 8th, wouldn't have a problem bringing Presley in and then bringing him back on game 2 to save both games, and then he'd be perfectly available for game 3. Same thing for the White Sox with Kimbrel and Hendricks.
Unless they fall off a treadmill.
So you're saying Dusty won't have scheduled rest days for his starters?
With Dusty, you never know, but I'm going to guess no.
The Excel doc says Correa needs to take a day off. Guys.
Bregman's in the yellow. We're not going to let him get in the red.
Not going to let him get going. I want to talk a couple of things as we sort of get close to making our picks. One, we were all fired up and very happy about the Astros getting home field advantage in this series. Andy, how big a deal is it really?
Less so in baseball than other sports, but it's still, especially with the way the playoffs are structured, that you have 2 at home and then you've got 2 on the road. So let's say the Astros take full advantage of the home field. They win the first 2, then they're in Chicago. Great if they split, but if not, you're coming back home. That's where it really matters, is that last game, if it goes to a full 5-game series. I think these teams, there's enough of a gap in talent and experience that I think the Astros, it wouldn't really matter if they were starting at home or on the road. Better to be at home, better to eat home cooking, better to sleep in your own bed. But ultimately, at this point, with their level of experience, it really doesn't matter.
Brian, anything different?
I think it may matter in the other reason, which is the White Sox, a team with lots of players who've never been in the playoffs, who have very little playoff experience. Their first game in the playoff is going to be in a hostile road environment. And whatever effects it has, Andy's absolutely right that the effects are are relatively small. But it may be an extra advantage in this type of series, whereas if we watch Yankees Red Sox tonight, I doubt it matters that game's in Fenway all that much. Both of those teams are very experienced in those type of games.
The other thing then I want to come back to has been the vitriol and that the Astros have received on the road because of sign stealing. And I think we all know it's histrionics. I point out to Ben DuBose on Twitter yesterday, who identified a newly hired member of the Astros front office staff who 1 year ago called them the most despicable organization ever. I mean, the Nazis at least had a point of view, I think is something he said at one point. I don't know if he said that, but the point is that he got over it pretty quickly to get hired. Regardless of whether or not it's real or not, I mean, we all know that Cleveland booed Michael Brantley. So there you go. That shows you the intelligence of all this. But do you think that there's a possibility that dealing with that this year and dealing with everybody wanting them to lose has actually made this team a little bit better, given them more of an edge, Andy?
I mean, you look for any advantage you can get in the game of baseball. So I think locker room speeches and I think bulletin board material are ridiculously overrated, and they're things for movies that people who have not been in a locker room really believe.
This is why I love and hate having both of you guys on the show, because I'm Mr. Yeah, it matters, dude. Like, it's emotion, and I guess I'm the filmmaker on the group. So
I think emotion to some extent is good, but I also think that it's overblown by people who aren't in the locker room. I think the Astros are a team of professional baseball players who have won a World Series. Most of them have played in an ALCS, I think, with the exception of like 3 guys. Maybe 4. They know what it takes to get there. They've been in these situations. So their motivation is internal and with the guys in the room a whole lot more than it is caring about what somebody on ESPN says about them, what somebody's throwing an inflatable trash can out in the field. And I fully expect that when we get to Chicago again, because they're super original. Yeah. It's just, do you circle the wagons? Sure. But do you do that in the playoffs anyway? Absolutely. So I don't know that matters. Do I think we're going to hear about it nonstop from whatever network is covering the games? Oh, 100%.
I won't, because I'll have Robert and Steve synced up to my TV, because that's how I roll.
But then how will you know what happened the last time the Astros and White Sox met in the playoffs that they will talk about incessantly?
That shit's burned in my memory. That's how I know. Brian, your thoughts on that?
First of all, I believe AJ Przinsky is broadcasting the games, which indicates that, the networks hate us. And I don't say that because he's a member of that White Sox team. I just mean that as a general commentary on AJ Przinsky's.
I mean, as a Catholic, I think God hates us because he created AJ Przinsky. So
beyond the theological issues here, which I'm not sure any of the three of us are fully qualified to deal with, the Astros have, if my quick math is correct, played 57 playoff games in the last four postseasons. So that's Altuve, Bregman, Gurriel, Correa, in addition to a bunch of the pitchers who've been there. So again, they know how to do this. This is part of why is Altuve hitting 3-run home runs in Yankee Stadium while everyone is singing, off-color birthday, happy birthday to him, which I got to go to and witness and hear myself. Because he is able to block out the noise because he's done that for years. This is not a new thing for those guys. And look, like some of Jake Meyer's first games in the major leagues were in that series in Dodger Stadium. And I think that's a very quick baptism by fire that, you're going to be bothered by a bunch of what these people do. And in general, as professional athletes, my guess is, my sort of assumption is they've learned how to do this years ago. Because if you got, if you got bothered by something, if your performance suffered because of something that some yahoo in the fan said, Alex Bregman would have cowered on the field at, playing Mississippi State in college, right? That they've overcome much more things in this, and they're sort of able to do that. And I think that sort of works the other way too, right? That, whatever advantage there is modest, right? From a home field advantage, because, Jose Abreu, had to defect from communism to get to this country. You think
that's true.
What you say in the first base, on the first base foul line is really going to bother him that much? I mean, I hope it does for the Astros' sake, but I wouldn't count on it.
Okay,
we have 3 Cubans versus their 1, so that's an advantage.
So
we didn't go to the Cuban X Factor yet. All right, well, let's take
I had a Cuban sandwich for lunch yesterday, so hopefully that helps.
I have to get chicken.
Yeah, we're in Frito pie range, aren't we?
Yeah, we really are, Andy. We hope you've been girding your loins or your gut. All right, so I guess what I want to do now is, I know that we're going to be back after every playoff game as much as we can and stuff like that, and we'll preview the ALCS. But I kind of want to take let's actually just go series by series and see how we think what the matchups are going to be, and then how the Astros are going to shake out at the end of this postseason, and that way we have some measuring stick to match it up against. ALDS, I have the Astros in 4. Brian?
I had the Astros in 5.
Andy?
I also have the Astros in 4.
Okay.
Oh, I'm the pessimist on this one.
All right, Brian, who is the ALCS opponent then? Is it going to be your wife's Boston Red Sox, who I am rooting for tonight?
We're definitely rooting for in this house. And by the way, let me say, it was a very interesting emotional contrast in my household this weekend between, hey, let's root for chaos. Let's get a game 163. And my wife just going absolutely nuts with every single pitch. And of course, the Red Sox had to come back twice. So it was not an emotionally healthy atmosphere for her.
Right.
Neither is May. I think it's going to be the Rays on the other side. They are clearly the best team. And they won 2 or 3 against the Yankees this weekend without even trying, with nothing to play for. And they are a ridiculously deep team who will, I'm halfway expecting, just throw 9 guys for 1 inning each and throw a shutout that way in one of these games in the playoffs. And hopefully that's against the Red Sox or Yankees, not against the Astros and the ALCS.
Andy, what about you? Who do you think it's the Rays?
I think the Red Sox win tonight because I'm always going to root for MLB to be wrong. So the Yankees need to lose. And so you have full support of the show. Your wife does, Brian. But I think the Rays are too good and too strong. And I think, the regular season will have some bearing on what happens, what happens in the playoffs in that particular instance. And so I see the Rays beating whoever comes out of that wild card game pretty easily.
All right, then if we have Astros, Rays in the ALCS, Andy, how do you think that shapes up? Sitting here now, knowing lots can change.
I'll be the first bad guy and say the Rays win that series in 6 games.
Okay, Brian.
So the Rays won that series last year because Mike Zunino got a single in game 1, which still So whatever they gave to the baseball guys to give that will come back against them. Astros in 7.
I have Astros in 7 too. I know that you really can't look at regular season results and see how they sort of the transitive property to the playoffs, but it does seem like all those games, they felt like good baseball games, and the Astros came out in four of 2 of them, 4 of the 6. And I just don't know that the home field advantage in Tampa, unless they're giving away free stuff on the concourse because it truly is a Costco, I don't think it matters. All right, so
will they get
Andy,
Brady to show up so people will come?
maybe. Although maybe he will. Andy, then it's who are the Rays playing in the World Series, and how does that end up for you?
Are we starting at the back end, or are we going?
No, we'll just go to the World Series.
Giants. Everybody's discounting the Giants. They've led that division since I think the end of May. It's not a fluke. And I saw somebody say that yesterday. Well, they've had a fluke season. You can't have a fluke season over 162 games. It doesn't work that way.
Not winning 107 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one of the best things about Major League Baseball is that it is a 162 game season. And if you won the division, if you have the best record in baseball, it's on purpose. And it's not an accident. I think they end up beating the Brewers in LCS. You can do the math on everything else, but I think those are your final 4 teams. And I think the Giants eventually take everything.
I think that'd be good for baseball. I think Giants, I don't know. I think it's good for baseball to have it not be one of, how I feel about LA or New York and Major League Baseball's role in that. What about you, Brian? Who are the Astros playing in the World Series, and how does that shape up?
I would have picked the Brewers, but the Brewers have 2 excellent relievers, and one of them broke his hand punching something during the celebration of their division title victory, which I desperately want to know more of the backstory on. Or James, if you can come up with a film script that would explain this here, that would be.
Oh, he lost his temper during the celebration at something. All right.
Who gets mad out of celebrate? I mean, okay, all right.
Nobody knows.
The champagne was not Corbel. I don't know what.
This must not have been.
So that pushes me back to the Dodgers. As great a story as the Giants have been, right? The Dodgers are still a team we look at with sort of better players, particularly with their top line pitching. I guess the best argument against the Dodgers is Kershaw is going to be out, and now Max Muncy, who's their best position player, looks like he's at least going to be out of the wild card.
That injury looked terrific.
So,
did y'all see the injury? It looked terrific.
See, I'm actually it did look horrific, but I'm pulling a McIntyre. I don't think the Dodgers survive 1 game.
I actually have Astros Cardinals in the World Series, and look, it's a matchup I want so much because it's I'm still permanently angry about being in the AL West. I miss playing the Cardinals that many times a year. It's an organization. I know Andy and I both have a lot of respect for how it's set up, and I think their fan base actually they're not a fan base that gets like the Yankees do up and down with every game. They're like, well, no, this is how baseball works. I would love to see that matchup. And now I'm backed up with the fact that they're coming in, maybe being the team that's put it the most together in the last 3 or 4 weeks of the season. So I have the Astros and Cardinals, and I think I'll dedicate this pick to Scott McIntyre. Astros in 4. Gonna beat that ass. So, all right. Well, that is wrapping up our go ahead.
I'd say, as veteran baseball fans, and people who've been watching this for a long time, I think all 3 of us deeply believe in Cardinals devil magic. It is real.
It is.
Oh,
real.
Absolutely. 100%.
It is.
Those damn fried raviolis.
That's right. Exactly. So that does wrap up our ALDS preview. And we'll be back throughout the playoffs to follow this and after the season. But guys, thanks so much for jumping on. It was a good first season, and I can't wait to keep following the Astros as the show grows.
Thank you, Jim, and go Stros.
Go Stros.
Go Stros. So you've already heard the fanboy approach to this series, but we're real excited to be joined by Jake Kaplan, who covers the Astros for The Athletic, and who is, by the way, Jake, you are our favorite Astros beat writer on the show. So I don't know what that gets you. Starbucks later, maybe, but there you go. How's it going, man?
Maybe you can help me decorate my background here, because you have all this stuff going on and I have absolutely nothing, even though I've lived here for 5 years. So that's the bad job by me.
I just added a new proton pack back there. What do you think of that, huh?
Nice.
I mean,
Nice.
Catholic school, you can't be too careful with things coming from beyond the grave, as they say. So
I do have like a Star Wars movie poster in the other room. I need someone to help me hang it up because I'm terrible at that stuff.
so you've lived there for 5 years, and that's the decorating we've gotten done.
Yep, exactly. The life of a 30 something, well, now 31-year-old male in Houston living by himself.
But you get to travel with some baseball. First of all, just talk about that from, I mean, obviously you care about the game, you work and you cover the game. Was it nice for 2021 to start feeling a little bit normal about halfway through the season, or was it still weird doing everything through Zoom, that kind of thing?
Some of both. Around like June, we got to start doing interviews on the field during beat batting practice before the game, which was nice because it opened up another thing that's not only Zoom or a phone interview. But at the same time, it's not what we used to have either, because we used to go in the clubhouse for 40, 50 minutes to an hour before every BP session. And the weird thing is, like, once they get onto the field for BP, they're not out there to like talk to reporters. They're out there to do their job and work and practice baseball. So it's different. And then the travel part of it, yeah, I only did about 3 road series, which is less than I would do in the normal times, but more than obviously last year. So definitely feels good to be back on the road a little bit. I will be in Chicago and following them throughout the playoffs, but still doesn't feel quite normal. It's somewhere in between, I would say.
Hopefully we'll get there. Liz, obviously we're here to talk Astros, White Sox. And one of the things that I think you're probably better at than most is roster construction prediction. And, we've been talking about it. I like to look at the ridiculousness through the lens of Astros Twitter. There was for a while people that wanted Siri starting in center, despite the fact that he seemed to not be able to catch a fly ball, nor see a third base coach,
Right.
In fact, that the triple everyone talks about that you missed, I guess, because you were not at the game, he ran through a stop sign and would have been thrown out had it been a normal major league outfielder. Like, he would have been out by a while. So that's obviously, I guess, not going to happen. Do you see Chas McCormick or Jake Myers becoming the starting center fielder, or do you feel like it's going to be a platoon between those guys?
I think you're going to see both. Won't be a platoon because they both bat right-handed. Platoons, the definition is one righty,
Right.
one lefty. I often see that misused, and I used to misuse it all the time. And Chris Wheeler, the former Phillies broadcaster, who read every word, once corrected me on that, and I've never forgotten it. Not on the air, like in the hallway or whatever. But yeah. So I think you'll see both of them. They both hit lefties better than righties. They're pretty similar offensively. I would say McCormick's maybe slightly better. I think Myers is the better defender. So I think you'll see both, depending on the matchup and stuff that we probably don't think about too much. Like, say it's Lance Lynn and he throws a ton of fastballs. Who's the better fastball hitter? I don't even know who it is, but you start that guy.
Yeah.
Who's on the mound for the Astros matters because, ground ball versus fly ball. But McCormick, it's not like McCormick's bad out there either. So, I think you'll end up seeing both of them. Neither of them really is the clear cut, should start every day guy, in my opinion. Maybe one emerges throughout the postseason, but coming into it, that's kind of how I see it.
The other big question is going to be the bullpen construction, right? And, I've seen arguments to not have a left-hander at all in the bullpen. One of the members of the show can't imagine Dusty Baker allowing that to happen because he's so old school. How do you see the bullpen shaping up because of how just right-handed the White Sox are?
Yeah. So you mentioned that I like to project the rosters. I did one last Friday. Yes, Friday, that ran the morning after they clinched the division. And I'm pretty sure I'm going to be the most wrong I've ever been in a roster projection. Just because I did what I think they should do more than what I think they will do. And I had no lefties in the bullpen. I would also be surprised if a Dusty Baker managed team didn't have one lefty. They might carry both lefties. I don't see where you need either of them. I guess maybe if there's 2 outs and Cesar Hernandez in the 8 hole is is up, or Gavin Sheets, or these guys that aren't really like. I mean, Gavin Sheets is actually kind of a good player, but like this year. But I don't know. I mean, if you bring one in, then you're risking them getting on base and them facing a righty, like last year when they brought in Brooks Raley for the Twins, and I think he walked a lefty, and then Nelson Cruz is up and he doubles. So I think you just kind of bank on your righties who can get lefties out. Like I think they'd be better off with Phil Maton in that Gavin Sheets 8-hole spot than Brooks Raley, just because Maton can throw his curveball, and it's good enough, I think, to get a lefty who's not an elite hitter.
Do you see Odorizzi? Do you see Greinke? And do you see Javier having big parts in the bullpen? I mean, Greinke looked good for the first 2 innings that he pitched out of the bullpen, and it kind of went awry from a little bit. But do you see that them actually being a weapon out of that?
Not really. I don't know how much of a role Greinke plays in this series. I think he makes the bullpen because he's Zach Greinke, and they're just like not going to leave off Zach Greinke.
Right.
But like, I could see him just being like the guy who's like saved for extra innings, or I don't know. I mean, his struggles down the stretch, number one, and also he's terrible against righties this year. Like, he's really good against lefties. I think if they play the Rays, he's a much better matchup there, right? Because they have more lefties and switch hitters. I just don't think there's really a place for him. I guess like there's been some buzz of maybe an opener in Game 4 with him, but again, and he's facing like 6 righties. Like,
yeah.
Do you really want to risk that? So I think Javier, on paper he should dominate righties. That's his thing, but he's been so up and down. I don't know. I think he's got a better chance of playing like a bridge role. And Odorizzi is kind of like decent against righties and lefties, not super dominant against either, obviously. But if you need innings, he could do it. I had all 3 of them on my roster, but that was my roster without a lefty. So one of them, if they carry a lefty, one of them is probably off.
Probably seems like it'd be Javier too, because he's been the most erratic, or I guess equally erratic, but also not a veteran. So then you have that sort of, who knows when you get to postseason, the lights get brighter, how they'll probably Greinke and Odorizzi.
Last year he was great, but there was no fans in the stands, right? So
has it shocked you how much that's kind of seems to have messed with a lot of young players across the league of having fans now? I mean, I think Inoli, Paredes for the Astros, but there's been examples all over baseball about that.
Yeah, I kind of thought it was overrated, like in terms of performance, but I don't think it was, especially pitchers with the adrenaline. And it's a big difference going from, like in Inoli Paredes' case, he had never pitched in AAA, so his highest level was Corpus Christi. Going from that ballpark to triple deck ballparks in the majors is a big difference. And then you add fans in. I mean, I think it is a factor. I mean, I also think some guys just have control questions, and they manifest sometimes. But yeah, no, I mean, it did surprise me how much that seemed to play into it these last 2 years.
So I guess let's talk a little bit about the White Sox, and then we'll look at the matchups. But just overall, what do you think what is the strength of the White Sox for those Astros fans who haven't really paid that close attention? I think Astros fans are easy to dismiss them because of the division they played in and the fact that the Astros went 5-2 against them in the regular season. Where do you think that they're strong, and where can the Astros get them?
Their strength is their bullpen. Their bullpen. If this series becomes a battle of the bullpens, the White Sox have the advantage there. I mean, they're like 6 deep, and everyone knows Liam Hendricks and Craig Kimbrell. The rotation was really good in the first half of the year, and it's still good, but Carlos Rodon hasn't, he's been kind of off and on, injured and diminished velocity. I still think he probably plays a role in this series in like a Game 3 start maybe, but it sounds like he might only make 1 start. Their lineup's good, but not elite, or at least performance-wise hasn't been elite. But they've got some real dudes there, especially, I mean, we've talked about how right-handed they are. I think that actually kind of matches up well for the Astros because their best starters are all better against righties than lefties. McCullers with the slider, Garcia with the cutter. Valdez is good against both. So yeah, I think, it's weird because like in the back of your head, you still have like that 2018 Indian series, right? Where it's like, oh, right, that division's terrible. But like talking to people this week, there seems to be a take that it's going to be a really tight, close series, and these teams are pretty evenly matched. So I think the Astros are the Vegas favorite, but I could easily see this going 5.
It is interesting because it does feel, from a fan perspective, feel like that Indian series where I thought the Indian series was going to be tighter than it was. I thought it was going to be close. Just looking at the starting rotation they threw out there, and then it ended up not being that. And all those guys ended up being super big winners in life afterwards. So never mind. That's not a conversation for this podcast. But talking about the White Sox lineup, a lot of it has been made that they were not healthy, particularly when the Astros played them in Houston for the only time I think the Astros swept anybody, it felt like, in the 4 games back then. Dusty's allergic to sweeps, I guess. What bat in that lineup scares you if you're an Astros pitcher?
Luis Robert. He's been, especially since he's come back from his injury, I forget what his injury was, but he's been like godlike, and he's a center fielder too. So he's really scary. I think Eloy Jimenez, hasn't had the production, but is the talent is obvious. Jose Abreu was the MVP last year. Tim Anderson's kind of like the guy at the top. They have a lot of dudes. They have a lot of good hitters, but I would say Robert number 1. And maybe in this case also Yasmani Grandal, because he can bat lefty. He's a switch hitter, and like I said, the Astros starters are better against righties than lefties.
Yeah, that seems like that might be something the Astros will have to look for. Let's look at the Astros lineup, though. Also a group of dudes, right? Like and it feels weird to watch fans again react because most of the Astros fans you see on Twitter or whatever, they're younger. They don't understand the history of the team really, but there's a sense that it just feels like this team is light years behind the 17, 18, 19, and 20 teams. What's your take on that as someone who just covers them? I mean, do you feel like it's that big a drop off from what they did last year, the year before that, and the year before that?
My take is that you spend too much time on Twitter, number 1.
Dude, no kidding.
No. I mean, last year's team was bad, right? Like, they're definitely better than last year's team. 19, I don't think they're as good, but the ball's different, right? The game's different. I think they were the second best offense, in baseball. They were 7 deep, and even the 8-hole hitter with the center fielder is pretty good relative to the average, major league hitter. So I think they're really good. I think they had those weird games against good pitchers, bad pitchers, where they would just not hit. And I think that's probably Astros Twitter's fear, right? Is that you're going to get those games in a series, in a playoff series. They're interesting in that there's not, like, I think Kyle Tucker was the close, he was elite, but they're more like, they have more, like, they don't have like an MVP candidate for their offense. Like Correa would have been an MVP candidate if Shohei Ohtani didn't exist, but a lot of it is his defense on top of his offense and the position he plays. There was no guy who had an 1,000 OPS like Bregman did in 18 or 19, even Alvarez. I think I said before the season he was going to hit 50 home runs. He had 33, which still led the team, but like it wasn't this like godlike season. But they're really good. They make a lot of contact, which is always, it's been proven plays in October. I think it always comes down to who's hot and who's not. I don't think I think experience matters, but only a little bit. And I think ultimately it's like, if Bregman's hot, if Altuve's hot, like, that's all that really is going to matter. And it's stuff that we can't predict. I don't think, weird games against whoever they got shut out by in recent weeks plays into it. Just like I don't think games where they shelled a guy in recent weeks plays into it. It's just it all resets this week.
I do spend too much time on Twitter though. I just want to fight with stupid people for some reason, and I don't understand why.
Maybe Twitter should have shut down on Monday instead of
Facebook. Yeah,
Facebook for your sake.
Yeah, no kidding. But yeah, it's a lot of It's a lot of stuff. The playoffs this year, just looking at it from a macro view, do you think we're in for a lot of close series? Do you think you see a lot of series going the distance, or are there a couple teams out there? Do you think they could just pretty much sweep their way through?
I think there's like I think there's only a couple teams that I can't see winning the World Series, right? Like, I mean, any team that's in has a legit chance to win a World Series, but like, I can't really see the Boston Red Sox winning the World Series, or even like, I don't know, the Braves. But really, everyone else seems to be like, to me, and I haven't watched that much National League baseball in recent weeks, but everyone else seems to be pretty bona fide contender-ish to me. So yeah, I could see, especially because the Dodgers and Giants might have to play each other. Like if the Dodgers were playing the Braves, it'd be okay, maybe that's a sweep. Or if the Giants were playing, the Cardinals in a 5-game series. But yeah, I mean, the 5-game series format in itself is, it's unpredictable. So I think, every October there's a lot of coin flips out there. I think a lot of it is luck. I mean, I kind of wrote about this week in a story about Dusty Baker. Like he has this well-known playoff history, but like, you can point to certain decisions he made that were right or wrong, that didn't work, more importantly. But there's also a big luck component to it. And I think we have to acknowledge that in all these cases too.
That is, I think, the frustrating thing about baseball is its playoff system is nowhere like its regular season, right? The regular season is built to really show the strength of a team. But like you said, you get hot for a 5-game series and then it's over with before you know it.
Yeah. Like how often does the best team actually win? Like I was a Phillies fan growing up, and I think their best team was 2011 and they lost in the first round.
Mm-hmm.
I think the 2010 team and the 2009 team were probably better than the 2008 team that won it all. Right. And so, I think last year the best team won, but in 19, I don't think the Nationals were the best team. In 18, you could argue the Red Sox were. 17, you could argue the Astros were, though they had the 3rd best regular season record. 16,
and that wasn't even the best Astros team of that 3-year stretch, 17 to 19.
Yeah, I would say 19 was, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just there's so much luck and randomness, and it really is a crapshoot.
Well, I guess as we wrap up, then I have the Astros in 4. Tell me why I'm right or tell me why I'm wrong.
I have Astros in 5. I think I came into the week with Astros in 4, but talking to people about the White Sox more got me to Astros in 5. There seems to be skepticism about the Astros pitching, which I understand, especially in the bullpen side. Graveman, Garcia, Maton haven't really lived up to expectations. Presley is really good, but even he's had some shaky moments lately. And then the starting pitching, I think it's like that lack of an ace, still kind of hovers over. But I don't really think.
And the walk rate. I mean, that's the thing, right? The Astros at all levels walk a lot of guys, and that will kill you in the playoffs.
Yeah. But I don't think either team really has a quote unquote ace in this series. I think most teams don't, honestly. But yeah, I think you could end up being right. I think, but I think Astros in 5 is more like the cop out prediction. So that's where I'm going.
Okay. All right. So let's
whenever you predict to go the distance, it's like the easy. I feel like it's just easier to, the odds are it'll go there.
Well, who do you have in both LCSs and then winning the World Series? Have you thought that far ahead?
I haven't. I think one of the Dodgers and Giants is going to win the World Series. Like whoever comes out of that DS. But I also think the Brewers are kind of sneaky on that side.
If they're not punching anything.
Yeah. On the AL side, it looks wide open to me. Like I think, I don't really buy the Red Sox, but I think the Yankees, have potential to make a run if they get out of the wild card game. The Rays are obviously going to raise, although I don't think they're as, their bullpen's not as scary as it was last year. Astros are obviously really good if they can, pitch like we were just talking about. So yeah, I guess if you're putting me on the spot for a World Series prediction, I would probably say Giants Rays.
Okay.
Giants over Rays.
I think it'd be kind of good for baseball too. I think, I don't know. I think it would. Again, let's 2 final questions in case we're not able to have you on before things wrap up. Is Correa an Astro next year?
I would guess no. And that's kind of my answer with every free agent, but there's going to be a pretty strong market for him, obviously. And the Astros have never shown a willingness to sign a mega contract. And I think there's still a chance. Like, I don't think there's zero chance. Like
it feels more possible than Springer, because there was all that stuff with Springer and his contract before, he was known to be upset about the manipulation of his service time.
Well, there's also he was 31 and Correa is 27 or whatever, right? Like, that's a big factor. But I think there's also going to be a stronger market for Correa. Correa is going to end up with a lot more money in years than Springer did too. So ultimately,
Bobby Bonilla contract.
Ultimately, I would be surprised, but I don't think it's a 0% chance. I think it's gonna be really interesting because, and it's also going to be annoying because none of it's going to happen before the CBA, right? So we're going to be talking about this till February, January, the earliest.
Right before the season starts in May of 2023.
Yeah, it's almost I get why we're talking about it so much. I write about it. Everyone writes about it. Correa's future. But we're also going to write this in the next 4 months too.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Plenty of time to talk about it.
Last question: is Dusty Baker managing here in 2022 or 23, whenever the season picks up again?
I do think there'll be a season next year, for the record. I don't know. Honest answer, I don't know. I think it's clearly up in the air, and which gives off the impression that depends on how the postseason goes. Typically a 95 win manager comes back, right? Mm-hmm. But the fact that we saw other managers get extensions and he didn't before the playoffs suggests that there's uncertainty there. So I really don't know the answer to that one. It might be obvious in a couple of weeks, depending on what happens, but coming into the playoffs, I think it seems very much up in the air.
All right. Well, he is Jake Kaplan, covering the Astros for The Athletic. Make sure you follow him on Twitter. We'll put all the stuff down here. Jake, thanks so much for jumping on.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was fun.